One of the questions I'm always asked, I've spoken on this book probably 12 countries to 10,000 people or more in the last few years, and they always ask me, how did you come up with that title, if we can put a man on the moon? But think about how many times you've heard that phrase. If we can put a man on the moon, why can't we end homelessness? If we can put a man on the moon, why can't we fix our schools? Why can't we cure cancer? Or here in Austin, why can't we end cedar fever, right? But my favorite use of this phrase is especially popular among the ladies, and that's if we can put a man on the moon, why can't we put them all there? And now, it didn't start off as a cliche, of course. This started off as a challenge issued by President John F. Kennedy in 1961 when he said this nation should commit itself before the decade is over of landing a man on the moon and bringing him safely back to Earth. Now, the astronauts at the time were pretty happy that the speechwriters inserted bringing them safely back at the time. That was very good. It was an impossible challenge when he issued this, but America pulled together, and in 1969, Neil Armstrong planted the American flag on the moon. Now, how many of you remember where you were at that time? Raise your hands. Look at that. It was one of those few times in history when time stood still. I've been in Japan, I've been in Africa and elsewhere. People remember where they were at the time. It was an amazing achievement. It inspired a generation. It was climbing Mount Everest, going to the North Pole, going solo across the Atlantic, flying solo across the Atlantic, all rolled into one. Now, recent events, however, haven't inspired a lot of ticker tape parades. Iraq, Katrina, the collapse of the tunnel in Boston's Big Dig, the financial meltdown. Increasingly, Americans are very pessimistic about our ability to get big things done. Now, if anything, the political dysfunction is even worse. Trust in our government is at an all-time low. Congressional approval ratings, look at that. They're about 10% right now, just about in the single digits. And as Vice President Joe Biden has said, Washington today is broken. I've never seen it this dysfunctional. Researchers recently found that simply thinking about politics gets people depressed. So how do citizens react? They've reacted by taking to the streets to express their opposition, their displeasure, and their utter disgust. The Tea Party movement and Occupy Wall Street are really just opposite sides of the same coin. They both express an utter kind of disillusionment and rejection of the foundations of our current system, which they believe are rigged in favor of special interests, which are short-term focused, and increasingly, which are at loggerheads with the interest of average Americans. But it's not only in the United States that we see this. We see this kind of distrust and loss of confidence in government institutions, in big institutions in general, all over the world. In Canada, trust in government is down 10% in the last decade. In the EU, only a third of citizens trust government to do the right thing. In New Zealand, it's a paltry 7%. And we see the Arab Spring turning into an Arab winter. And it's my Irish ancestors there who kind of put this the most colorfully. I love that word, useless gobshites. So when I say all this, how does this make you feel? How does it make you feel? I'm looking out, you look really depressed. I feel like I need to be taking bags of Prozac and throwing them out to the audience right now. But I'm not here to depress you, because here's my surprise. I've been doing this for over 2 decades, and I don't think I've ever been more optimistic about our future than I am today. Why? And you've been seeing it all day long here because the creative capacity of citizens, of businesses, of nonprofits, social enterprises, not government budgets, determines the reaches of our ability to solve big problems and deliver services today. While government seems stuck, at the same time this is happening, we see all of these new entrants coming in to fill the void. New contributors. The world of public services, the world of problem solving is expanding dramatically. Now, many of these new organizations, both private sector companies and others, didn't even exist 10 years ago. Think about what's going on. We see funders like the Gates Foundation, the Acumen Fund. In the UK, the Big Society Fund. We see conveners like the Clinton Global Initiative, social enterprises like Ushahidi, Kiva, and Samasource, and companies like Procter & Gamble, Whole Foods, and Unilever, which are going out there and delivering things and innovating in ways and delivering public value like we've never seen before, and they're closing this gap between citizens' expectations, which are going like that, and government capabilities. And we've seen some of them here today. I mean, what Jason was talking about earlier with the better blocks, they're closing that gap. Now, these new entrants are powered by new business models. Business models like crowdsourcing and platforms and two-sided markets and specialization and freemium and a lot of other business models. And look at the kind of value that they're creating today. We don't know exactly how much, but it's probably over $1 trillion, and it's going to get more and more and more in the future. So the new business models that they're creating are powered by disruptive new technologies like cloud computing, data analytics, mobile computing, and social media. And what's interesting about all of this is that these are actually resulting in the borders of government are actually disappearing. We're seeing a blurring of the boundaries between the public and private sector like we've never seen before. I think Jason's example earlier in Dallas, where they kind of were taking over the streets, right, and actually putting in their own crosswalks, that's a real blurring of the boundaries. And what's interesting about this is that the future is increasingly, it's from transportation to education, from social services to cybersecurity. It's not siloed government agencies, but it's these public-private ecosystems that are increasingly developing the innovations that are going to make our world a better place. And increasingly in these ecosystems, government is not always the orchestra conductor in these. In fact, sometimes government's just a member of the band. Sometimes even just the tuba player. And no offense to tuba players. But you know what? That's okay. That's okay, because we can no longer ask government to do everything. The money is not there, and we've seen these examples today of we need to take this more on ourselves. So let me look at 3 different examples of areas with very, very difficult societal problems where increasingly we're seeing these sort of new models take place. Education, providing affordable health care to the poor, and creating a more sustainable planet. Now, healthcare. We've seen double-digit increases healthcare inflation for decades, not only in the US, but also in some countries with single-payer systems like Canada. In America, we're really, really good at providing very high quality, very expensive healthcare. We're not so good at providing quality healthcare that's inexpensive in a way that people can afford it. But other people, other countries have actually figured this out. Now, this hospital chain does more heart surgeries than just about anyone else in the world. And they're able to use their high volume and their scale to actually drive down costs significantly. The doctors there, they do about, they specialize in 1 or 2 types of surgeries, and they do it at a fraction of the cost of what it is. It's $2,000 there, $20,000 to $100,000 for the cardiac bypass surgery in the US. And they're doing this without sacrificing quality. Lower mortality rate than we see here. So where is this located? What do you think? Any guesses? What's that? Cuba, South Africa, no? Korea? There you go. India. Narayana is just one of numerous low-cost, transformative healthcare innovations coming out of India today. A number of them actually funded by US institutions and foundations like the Acumen Fund, the Gates Foundation, and others. Here's another one, LifeSpring Maternity. They have figured out a way to deliver babies using the specialization model for $80, which is 30% lower than the regular rate, and which is really important because the average client makes only $2 to $4 a day. Another example, which has become quite famous, is Ariand Eye Hospital. It does over 300,000 cataract surgeries a year for, on average, $25 a person, compared to $1,600 in the US. Now, look at those numbers. Increasingly, as we see more and more innovations like this in emerging countries, what's going to happen is more and more Americans and Westerners are flying overseas to get operations. It's increasing by 35% annually. And I think it's interesting that Narayana is actually opening up a hospital in the Cayman Islands to serve Westerners. So let's look at another example. Sustainability, creating a greener planet. Now, one of the keys to doing this is that we have to increase recycling. It's actually been stagnant for the last decade or more, as you can see here. Despite endless public service announcements and all the recycling campaigns, it hasn't moved very much. Where it has moved is in the 300 or so communities around the country where an organization called Recycle Bank is operating. Now, Recycle Bank is a social enterprise. It was started up by a former colleague of mine named Ron Gonen. Now, Ron, when he started it up, he didn't know a lot about recycling, but what he did have was a lot of passion, and he had a really innovative, interesting business model. And the premise was simple. He said, well, people respond to incentives, and they seek out rewards. So think about your recycling bin. What if your recycling bin could actually measure how much you're recycling on a real-time basis, and it could actually report that back? So what he did was he found someone who had actually put RFID tags and sensors on the recycling bin, and they were able to measure that, and then they got 3 million people to sign up for it, and you could actually get points and rewards for how much you're able to recycle, that you can redeem for real products and real savings from lots of companies. So what did they do? They gamified the recycling business. So that sounds interesting, but what were the results? What did the results look like? They were astounding. Look at this. In one suburb of Philadelphia, recycling rates went from 9% to 90% within months. Wilmington, Delaware, 19-fold increase in recycling rates. And the average family, the average household that is part of the Recycle Bank program, they save about $130 a year using this sort of a system. So the good news is that there are hundreds of similar innovations like Recycle Bank out there right now. We see social enterprises, private sector businesses, and others who are going far beyond the reaches of what we've ever seen before in terms of societal problem solving. They're developing really innovative new business models powered by these disruptive technologies, using behavioral incentives to solve old problems in radically new ways. Nowhere more so than education. Now, education is one of those areas that's been kind of the most resistant to this sort of fundamental change in innovation over the years. Yet it's also the area within the last 5 years or so where we're starting to see the most of this sort of innovation I'm talking about. We're seeing a whole new ecosystem of innovators in the education space right now who are arising from the private sector, the nonprofit sector, social enterprises, other educational institutions. And what they're doing is they're developing content and personalized learning in a way that's going to revolutionize the education experience. Let me give an example or two. So let's say you are a child and you needed a lot of specialized help. Previously, essentially, you could get a tutor if you had enough money, and a tutor could help you to learn much more quickly. But if you didn't have that money or if you couldn't get a grant, you're kind of out of luck, right? Now, what we see is all sorts of education companies and institutions like Compass Learning, which is right here in Austin, who are developing personalized learning experiences and using analytics to personalize learning for every child. In the future, every child will have their own kind of digital tutor that will be essentially locked into what their personal learning styles are. What about higher education? So in the past, if you wanted to hear some of the best professors and get a really good education in that respect, you basically had to go to one of our best universities. Most of them are in the West, right? And it could cost a lot of money, or you got a grant. Throughout most of the world, you were kind of out of luck. What we've seen recently with MIT, where they've opened up all of their courses to people, and Stanford and others, is that now anyone in the world can listen to some of the best professors online and take those courses. That's going to revolutionize higher ed. I was in South Africa a few months ago, and I was talking to a group of young people, and one of them told me, he said, "Oh, you know what? I'm taking a course in artificial intelligence at Stanford University right now. It's changing my life. I want to do all of these sort of things." Think about that. It's opened up this to hundreds of millions and billions of people. It's going to be very, very disruptive, but it's going to be disruptive in a good way. So what about you? What does this all mean for you? So how many of you in this room are government officials? A couple. I'd like to see more, but so for you, this doesn't mean that your role is less than it was before. It just means it's different. Instead of having to solve all the problems and deliver all the services, you become more of an enabler, a convener, a funder. I was talking to a UK official earlier in the week, and he said, what we need to do is learn how to mobilize better, mobilize all these resources to produce more public value. How many of you work for big companies? Raise your hand. A good amount of you. Well, companies are going to have to change too, because the employees and the customers no longer is profit just enough. They want to see more. They want to see bigger meaning. They want to see double and triple bottom lines. Companies are going to have to change how they think about this and figure out how to use the assets of your organizations to produce more public value. How many of you work for nonprofits or social enterprises? A good amount of you. Well, you've heard some of the stories today. I think one of the things to think about is you're going to have to probably raise your game. Figure out how to innovate your business model, how to leverage these technologies, how to scale, how to be a little bit more radical like Jason was talking about today. So in conclusion, fellow Austinites, what I want to say is you've heard some incredible presentations today. We're seeing a different world. Now is the time to go out and make a difference, to get out there. Not right now. Wait till the TED thing is over today. Wait till the reception, maybe tomorrow. But let's go out there and make the change that we want to see. Thank you very much.